You're the only one who looks at me like that, my friend's aunt said, stepping closer in the moonlit room. Hello, I'm Ethan. I'm 26, finishing my master's in urban planning. I'd been house-sitting at Marcus's place for 2 weeks when his Aunt Camille arrived from Paris. 3 days early. Unexpected. She wasn't supposed to affect me like this. Marcus's sophisticated aunt with her French accent and knowing eyes. But here we stood at her bedroom door. This is probably not wise, she'd whispered earlier. That probably changed everything. Now her hand found mine in the darkness. I could walk away, be sensible. Instead, I stepped inside. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. I had settled into a comfortable routine over the past 2 weeks. In Marcus's parents' sprawling suburban house, the kitchen table had become my thesis command center, scattered with urban planning notes and empty coffee mugs. The afternoon light slanted through the bay windows, casting warm rectangles across my laptop screen as I tried to untangle an argument about mixed-use development zones. The sound of keys in the front door made me look up. Marcus wasn't due back from his family trip for another few days, but I figured he might have cut it short. I rose from my chair, ready to welcome him home. But when the door swung open, it wasn't Marcus who stepped into the foyer. A woman paused in the doorway, carry-on bag in hand, looking as startled to see me as I was to see her. I recognized her immediately from the formal photos on the mantel, though the woman before me seemed younger, somehow more vital. This was Marcus's aunt from Paris, Camille, but the carefully styled woman from the family portraits had been replaced by someone more casual, more real. Her dark hair was pulled back carelessly, wispy strands escaping around her face. Her linen shirt was wrinkled from travel, and there was a slight smudge of mascara beneath one eye. Oh, she began, her accent lighter than I'd imagined. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, she broke off, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was something searching in her gaze that made me intensely aware of myself, of my worn t-shirt, my bare feet on the hardwood floor. Must be Marcus's friend, she said after a moment. The one house-sitting while David and Linda are away? I nodded, finding my voice. Yes, I'm Ethan. Marcus mentioned you'd be coming for the family reunion, but I thought I arrived early, she explained, setting her bag down. 3 days early. Actually, there was a change with my connecting flight in New York. She glanced around the kitchen, taking in my academic spread. I had assumed the house would be empty. Marcus said you were staying here to work on your thesis. Urban planning, I confirmed, suddenly conscious of my mess. I can pack up and find somewhere else to stay. If you'd prefer, don't be silly, she said, waving away my suggestion. This house has more than enough space for both of us. She lifted her bag again, heading toward the stairs. I'll take the guest room upstairs and won't disturb your work. Just before she ascended, she glanced back over her shoulder. It was a brief look, barely a second, but something in it, curiosity, amusement, made me completely lose track of the carefully constructed argument I'd been building about sustainable community design. I returned to my laptop, trying to recapture my train of thought. But instead of municipal zoning regulations, I found myself attuned to the soft sounds of movement from upstairs, footsteps crossing the hardwood, the gentle thud of a bag being set down, the creak of the guest room door. The quiet atmosphere I'd grown accustomed to hadn't exactly been broken, but it had shifted into something different. The space felt charged somehow, like the air before a summer storm. I stared at my screen, reading the same sentence about urban density requirements 3 times without absorbing a word. A door opened upstairs, followed by more footsteps. I could track her movement by the subtle sounds overhead, each one pulling at my attention like a gentle tap on the shoulder. The academic focus I'd maintained for 2 weeks had vanished, replaced by an acute awareness of another presence in the house, one that had transformed this familiar space into something new and undefined. I pushed back from the table slightly, running a hand through my hair. The afternoon light still painted its warm rectangles across my notes, but the solitude I'd been working in was gone. In its place was something else entirely, something I wasn't quite ready to name. I woke before sunrise on Wednesday, my mind still fuzzy from a restless night's sleep. The house felt different in the pre-dawn quiet, not quite the solitary space it had been, but not yet alive with morning activity either. My failed attempts at thesis writing from yesterday nagged at me as I padded down to the kitchen, bare feet silent on the cool hardwood. The familiar routine of making coffee helped ground me. I measured the beans, listening to the gentle whir of the grinder while reviewing my scattered notes from the day before. The scent of brewing coffee gradually filled the kitchen, promising clarity I desperately needed. With a full mug warming my hands, I decided to seek out a quieter spot to gather my thoughts. The sunroom had always been my backup workspace. Something about the way morning light filtered through its wall of windows helped me think. But as I approached, I realized I wasn't the only early riser. Camille was already there, curled into the corner of the window seat with her legs tucked beneath her. She wore soft gray loungewear, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking completely at home in the gentle morning light. A half-full coffee mug sat forgotten on the side table as she read. completely absorbed in her book. She looked up as I hesitated in the doorway, offering a warm smile that made the space feel instantly more welcoming. "Good morning," she said softly. "I hope I haven't taken your favorite spot." "Not at all," I replied, settling into one of the armchairs. "I just needed a change of scenery to think through some thesis problems." "Tell me about your research," she said, marking her place in her book. Marcus mentioned urban planning, but not the specifics. There was genuine curiosity in her voice, none of the polite distance I usually got when explaining my academic work. "I'm looking at how community spaces shape social connections in cities," I explained, surprised by how icily the words came, particularly how urban design either facilitates or inhibits meaningful interactions between residents. Her eyes lit up. "Like William White's work on social life in public spaces?" she asked, catching me off guard with her knowledge. "Or are you taking more of a Lefebvrean approach to spatial production?" I sat forward, my coffee momentarily forgotten. "You know spatial theory." "I should hope so," she laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "I run an architecture firm in Paris. We specialize in adaptive reuse projects, breathing new life into forgotten buildings while preserving their connection to community memory." Her passion was evident as she described her current project, converting an abandoned print factory into affordable housing for artists. Her hands moved expressively as she explained the challenges of maintaining industrial character while creating livable spaces, her accent becoming slightly more pronounced with enthusiasm. "The real magic," she said, "is how these old spaces carry stories. When we preserve and transform them thoughtfully, we're not just saving buildings, we're maintaining threads of community identity." It was exactly the kind of insight I'd been struggling to articulate in my latest chapter about community engagement models. I mentioned this, explaining my difficulty in bridging theoretical frameworks with lived experience. "I'd be happy to read it," she offered, surprising me again. Fresh eyes sometimes help, especially from outside pure academia. I hesitated, remembering dismissive comments from other academics about my practical focus. But something in her expression, open, genuinely interested, made me nod. "Let me grab my laptop." When I returned, she had moved to the kitchen table, clearing space among my scattered notes. I pulled up the draft I'd been wrestling with, watching as she began to read intently. The morning light strengthened around us as she worked, making occasional notes in the margins of the printed pages I'd left there. I pretended to review other sections of my thesis, but found myself stealing glances at her instead. Her complete focus was compelling, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the way she absently tucked her hair behind her ear as she read, the thoughtful tap of her pen against her lower lip, as she considered a point. Looking at her now, in the clear morning light, it struck me how different she was from the formal portrait on Marcus's mantel. That photograph had captured a polished surface, but missed entirely the quiet intensity I was witnessing, the sharp intelligence and genuine engagement that made her presence feel both challenging and comforting at once. When I returned from the coffee run that afternoon, I found Camille exactly where I'd left her at the kitchen table. My thesis chapter lay before her, now adorned with precise handwritten notes in blue ink. What caught my eye was a separate sheet where she'd mapped out my entire argument structure, but reorganized in a way that made perfect sense, revealing connections I'd missed after months of staring at the same words. "I hope you don't mind," she said, glancing up. I got carried away with the restructuring. "Mind." I set the coffee cups down carefully. "This is incredible. You've solved problems I've been circling for weeks." She smiled, pushing my cup toward me. "Sometimes it takes fresh eyes. Here, let me walk you through what I saw." We spent the next hour in deep discussion, her architect's perspective illuminating blind spots in my approach. She showed me how to strengthen my argument about community spaces by anchoring theoretical frameworks in concrete examples from her own projects. Her insights weren't just improving the chapter, they were transforming how I understood my own research. As evening light began softening through the windows, Camille stretched and checked her phone. "We should think about dinner. Please tell me you haven't been surviving on takeout alone." "I plead the fifth," I said, making her laugh. "Then we're cooking tonight." She stood decisively. "Marcus always keeps this kitchen well stocked. Let me teach you something useful." I followed her to the kitchen, watching as she surveyed the contents of the refrigerator with approval. She handed me vegetables to wash while she gathered other ingredients, moving through the space with comfortable familiarity. "First," she said, selecting a knife from the block, "proper technique for julienning vegetables. It will change your life." She demonstrated the motion, then handed me the knife. "Like this." She stood close behind me, reaching around to guide my hands into the correct position. Her perfume was subtle, something warm and slightly spicy, that made it hard to focus on the knife skills she was teaching. Her fingers adjusted my grip gently, and I found myself hyper-aware of every point of contact. "Good," she murmured, staying close as I attempted to copy her precise cuts. "Just angle the blade slightly more. There." We worked in companionable silence after that, moving around each other in the kitchen. When we both reached for the salt cellar, our fingers brushed. Neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact was slight, but it felt charged with possibility. Camille looked down at our touching hands, her voice soft when she finally spoke. This is probably not wise. That word probably hung in the air between us, more invitation than warning. After a long moment, she drew her hand back slowly, but the energy in the kitchen had shifted. We continued cooking, but now I was acutely conscious of every movement, every time we passed close to each other, every shared glance. Over the meal we'd prepared, Camille steered the conversation toward safer ground. What are your plans after graduation? I pushed a piece of perfectly julienned carrot around my plate. Honestly, grad school feels like postponing real decisions. I know what I'm passionate about, but translating that into an actual career path, I shrugged. That uncertainty is normal, she said. Sometimes the path only becomes clear when you're already walking it. She took a sip of water, then added, I have a gallery opening tomorrow evening, a friend's exhibition. You should come as my +1. The invitation fell somewhere between casual and deliberate, her tone carefully neutral. But after that moment in the kitchen, after hours of intellectual intimacy that had somehow felt more revealing than physical closeness, it carried weight. I met her eyes across the table. I'd like that. She nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The rest of dinner passed in conversation that felt ordinary on the surface, but hummed with undercurrent, like a code we were both learning to read. I spent Thursday afternoon in a spiral of indecision, standing before Marcus's hallway mirror, questioning every choice. The blue button-down felt too formal, the gray Henley too casual. I changed shirts twice before circling back to my first option, realizing I was overthinking a simple gallery opening, but nothing felt simple anymore, not since Camille had arrived. When she descended the stairs, my wardrobe anxiety evaporated, replaced by a different kind of nervousness entirely. She wore a black dress that transformed her from the casual, approachable woman who'd shared my kitchen table into someone who belonged in the glossy pages of an architecture magazine. The dress wasn't flashy, just elegantly cut in a way that made Marcus's suburban home feel suddenly provincial around her. Ready? She asked, gathering her coat. The simple question carried weight I couldn't quite decode. At the gallery, modern sculptures cast interesting shadows across the polished concrete floor. Camille moved through the space with easy confidence, her hand finding the small of my back naturally as she guided me through clusters of people discussing art theory. She introduced me to her friend Sylvie, the gallery owner, and various other attendees with a simple, "This is Ethan." No explanation of our connection, no acknowledgement of the age gap that felt both more and less noticeable in this setting. We paused before each piece, creating our own quiet dialogue within the larger buzz of the crowd. Camille's architects. I caught details I would have missed, the way one sculpture played with negative space, how another created different experiences from various angles. I found myself sharing thoughts about how the installations might spark community engagement, how public art shapes neighborhood identity. See how the light catches that edge, she murmured, leaning close to point out a detail. It completely changes the piece's relationship with the room. The gallery crowd around us felt somewhat pretentious. Lots of air kissing and wineglass gesturing as people competed to sound most insightful about the art. But our whispered commentary created an intimate bubble, like we were sharing private jokes in a public space. I watched Camille as she discussed material choices with another architect, noticed how she came alive in these conversations. This was her element, not just Marcus's aunt visiting from Paris, but an accomplished professional. With her own world of connections and interests, she was showing me a different facet of herself, intentionally or not, and I found myself wanting to know every version of her. An older woman in dramatic jewelry touched Camille's arm, asking how long we'd been together. I tensed slightly, waiting for the awkward correction, but Camille just smiled and smoothly redirected the conversation to the artist's use of recycled materials. Her choice not to deny the assumption felt significant, though I tried not to read too much into it. After an hour of making the rounds, I could sense Camille's social energy fading. The performance of it all, the artificial laughs, the repeated small talk seemed to wear on her as much as it did me. When she caught my eye during a particularly pretentious monologue about postmodern aesthetics, I recognized my own desire to escape reflected in her expression. "Should we head out?" I asked quietly when the speaker paused for breath. "Please," she whispered back, relief evident in her smile. Outside, the evening air felt cool and clarifying after the stuffy gallery. Camille took a deep breath, tilting her face up to the sky for a moment. "Would you mind if we walked for a bit?" she asked. "I'm not quite ready to go back yet." "I'd like that," I said, understanding completely. Whatever was building between us felt easier to explore in motion, away from the confined spaces where we had to acknowledge the complications. She slipped her arm through mine as we turned away from the gallery, a gesture that could have been merely practical in her heels on the uneven sidewalk, but nothing felt merely practical anymore. We walked away from the gallery district, letting our feet carry us through quieter downtown streets. The evening crowds had thinned, leaving us space to meander and talk without navigating around others. Our conversation drifted naturally from the exhibition to the city itself, how urban spaces shape the ways people connect or stay distant. You see that building? Camille gestured toward the old bank on the corner. Look at the medallions above the windows, pure Art Deco. They tell a story about what this city wanted to be in the 19th. I'd passed that building countless times in my 3 years here, but had never noticed the intricate details she pointed out. She had a way of making me see familiar spaces with new eyes. And there, she continued, leading me toward the small park. Notice how the benches are positioned. They face each other instead of all looking the same direction. It's intentional, encouraging conversation between strangers instead of isolation. The yellow glow of a streetlight caught her profile as she paused, considering the benches. Something in the moment, maybe the gentle illumination, maybe the quiet of the street seemed to invite confession. I spent so many years compromising on my vision, she said softly. In my marriage, I took the safe projects, the ones James thought were sensible. After the divorce 5 years ago, she trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Well, that's when I finally started doing the work I'd always dreamed of, adaptive reuse, community-focused design, all the things he called impractical. Her candor made me brave enough to offer my own truth. My ex wanted us to move to New York after graduation. She had it all planned out, which neighborhood, which firms to apply to, but I couldn't commit. Couldn't tell if I was hesitating because it wasn't right, or just because I was scared. Camille turned to face me fully under the streetlight. The warm glow softened her features as she studied me. You're not drifting, she said with quiet certainty. You're being careful. There's a difference. Something in my chest loosened at her words, like she'd offered absolution for all my uncertainty. We resumed walking, but the conversation had shifted into deeper waters. I was raised to be sensible above all else, she explained as we turned down a residential street. Very French, very proper. Every decision carefully considered for how it would look, what people would think. I followed all the rules, married the appropriate man, took the respectable projects. Until recently, I never allowed myself to want anything that didn't fit that mold. My parents split up when I was 12. I found myself saying, it was messy. The kind of divorce that makes you question every relationship you see. I think that's why I'm so afraid of committing to the wrong thing. I watched them realize they'd built a life neither of them actually wanted. The darkness made it easier to be honest, to voice thoughts I usually kept buried. Each block we covered seemed to peel back another layer of careful facades. Camille spoke about rebuilding her identity after her marriage ended, while I admitted how graduate school had become my way of postponing real decisions about my future. By the time Marcus's house came into view, we'd covered miles of pavement and years of history. The porch light cast a welcoming glow, but neither of us moved immediately toward the door. The night felt too rich with revelation to end just yet. Camille turned to me with a slight smile. I brought a bottle of wine from home, from a small vineyard outside Paris. Would you like to share it? The invitation held the same deliberate casualness as when she'd asked me to the gallery, that same sense of a door being left carefully ajar. We both knew we were no longer just two people, sharing a house by circumstance. I'd like that, I said, and followed her up the porch steps. I brought wine glasses from the kitchen while Camille retrieved the bottle she'd mentioned, a Bordeaux with a handwritten label. She turned it in her hands, smiling at some private memory. I visited this vineyard last summer, she said, working the cork free with practiced ease. It's a tiny place, family-owned for generations, the kind of hidden gem you stumble across by accident and never forget. The evening had cooled considerably, but neither of us suggested moving inside when she led the way to the back porch. We settled onto the wooden bench, and I noticed how naturally we sat closer than strictly necessary, our shoulders almost touching. The wine was deep and complex, tasting of sun-warmed earth and late summer evenings. I didn't expect this, Camille said after a while, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. She turned her glass slowly between her fingers. To feel this kind of connection again, especially not with she caught herself, then continued more carefully, with someone your age. I waited, sensing she had more to say. The crickets filled the silence with their gentle chorus. I keep thinking about how this looks, she admitted. The older woman having some sort of midlife crisis with her nephew's friend. It's such a cliché, isn't it? There was a touch of bitterness in her laugh, the kind of story people whisper about at parties. I set my glass down deliberately on the porch railing, turning to face her fully. Age is just context, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. It's not a definition. When I look at you, I don't see Marcus's aunt or any kind of stereotype. I see Camille, the architect who gets excited about Art Deco details and park bench placement. The woman who completely reorganized my thesis, argument over breakfast and taught me how to properly cut vegetables. She studied my face in the dim light spilling from the kitchen windows, and I could see her searching for any hint of hesitation or insincerity. The moment stretched between us, fragile as spun glass. You really see me that way? Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I'd never heard her sound so vulnerable. This confident woman who ran her own firm and navigated gallery openings with such ease. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady. The space between us seemed to contract. the cool night air growing warmer with each shared breath. Camille leaned closer, stopping just short of contact. I could feel her breath against my skin, sending electricity down my spine. "I need you." "To be sure," she whispered, her eyes searching mine. "Because if we cross this line, we both need to mean it." Instead of answering with words that felt inadequate, I closed the remaining distance between us. The kiss was gentle, more question than statement, giving her every chance to pull away. But her hand came up to rest against my chest, and I knew she could feel how hard my heart was beating beneath her palm. When we finally separated, we were both breathing unsteadily. The moment felt suspended, like the pause between musical movements. Camille stood slowly, smoothing her dress with slightly trembling hands. Then she turned to me and extended her hand toward the house, her eyes asking a question she wouldn't voice aloud. The porch light caught the curve of her cheek, the slight uncertainty in her expression, and I realized I'd never seen anything more beautiful than this woman being brave enough to risk her heart again. I took Camille's offered hand, feeling the delicate strength in her fingers as she led me through the darkened house. Each threshold we crossed felt significant, the back door clicking shut behind us. The transition from kitchen to hallway, every step bringing us closer to a point of no return. The house I'd lived in for weeks suddenly felt different, charged with possibility. We paused in the upstairs hallway, and I watched, mesmerized, as her thumb traced slow circles on the inside of my wrist. The touch was feather-light but magnetic, making it hard to focus on anything else. In the shadows, I could see her gathering courage, or maybe offering me one final moment to reconsider. When we reached her bedroom door, Camille turned to face me fully. Moonlight from the window at the end of the hall caught the planes of her face, illuminating the serious set of her expression despite the unmistakable desire in her eyes. "Last chance to be sensible," she murmured, but the warning lost its weight as her fingers continued their hypnotic patterns against my skin. The contrast between her words and actions made my heart race. "I don't want sensible," I told her, the words coming out low and certain. I'd never been more sure of anything. The smile that bloomed across her face transformed her entirely, genuine and unguarded. Erasing years of careful restraint, she pulled me into her room, where gauzy curtains filtered the moonlight into soft blue shadows that turned everything dreamlike. We moved with deliberate slowness, every touch a silent question. "Is this okay? Do you want this?" Each answered with clear permission in the form of sighs. Gentle pressure returned, the subtle shift of bodies drawing closer. "I haven't done this in a very long time," Camille confessed against my shoulder, her voice carrying a vulnerability that made my chest ache. "Haven't trusted anyone enough to really let them see me." The admission felt weighty in the quiet room, a gift I understood the value of. "You're the only one," I told her, running my fingers through her hair, "who's ever looked at me like I'm already enough. Not just someone still becoming." The words had been living in my heart without shape until that moment. Between slow, exploring kisses, we really talked about what we wanted. Not just from this night, but possibly beyond it. How to be careful with each other's hearts, even as we abandon caution in every other way. The conversation wove naturally through our touches, creating a foundation of understanding that made everything feel both safer and more intense. The initial urgency mellowed into something deeper, more tender. We took our time learning each other's responses, finding out what made breath catch and hands tremble. Every discovery felt significant, every shared moment precious in its newness. The moonlight played across her skin as she moved above me, making her look almost otherworldly. But then she'd smile, that real, warm smile that was purely Camille, and I'd be anchored again in the beautiful reality of this woman who somehow wanted me as much as I wanted her. We found our rhythm in that blue-shadowed room, moving together with increasing confidence as trust deepened between us. Time seemed to lose meaning, measured only in heartbeats and shared breaths, and the way she whispered my name like a prayer. Each touch felt like both a question and an answer. Each kiss both a promise and its fulfillment. We were writing our own rules here in the darkness, creating something that defied easy categorization, something that felt surprisingly like coming home. I woke to unfamiliar patterns of sunlight dancing through gauzy curtains. Taking a moment to orient myself in the gentle confusion of morning, the first thing I registered was Camille's touch, her fingers tracing lazy circles on my shoulder, creating paths of warmth that made me want to stay perfectly still to preserve the sensation. Neither of us spoke at first. Words felt too heavy for this delicate moment, like they might shatter whatever spell the night had woven around us. The silence was comfortable though, filled with soft breaths and the whisper of skin against skin as she continued her gentle exploration. Eventually, hunger made itself known, pushing us toward the kitchen despite our reluctance to leave the warmth of bed. We ended up sitting cross-legged on the cool tile floor, an arrangement that should have felt awkward but somehow didn't. She wore my thesis defense shirt, the one I'd left draped over a chair weeks ago, and I had wrapped myself in the throw blanket from the living room couch. The domestic intimacy of it all felt simultaneously foreign and absolutely right. "Coffee first," she murmured, the first words either of us had spoken. Her voice was morning soft, intimate in a way that made my chest tight. I watched as she moved around the kitchen with easy grace, her bare feet silent on the tiles, my shirt falling to mid-thigh as she reached for mugs, while she started on eggs. I retrieved my laptop and the revised thesis chapter, the one that now bore her influence in every paragraph. She'd transformed my argument with her suggestions, giving it a clarity I'd been struggling to find for months. I began reading sections aloud between sips of coffee, watching her nod along as she stirred the eggs. "The flow is much better now," she said, sliding a plate in front of me. "Your original ideas were strong, they just needed room to breathe." The way she could shift so naturally between intimate touches and academic discussion made something warm bloom in my chest. We talked through the changes as we ate, using the familiar territory of urban planning theory as a bridge across this new landscape between us. It felt safe, grounding, to discuss community engagement models and spatial theory while our feet touched under the blanket, while she stole bites from my plate with casual intimacy. But reality had its own plans. The afternoon approached with steady inevitability, bringing with it the family reunion that had brought her here in the first place. I watched her pack with a heaviness in my chest, neither of us quite ready for this interlude to end. She moved slowly, deliberately, pausing every few minutes to touch me, a hand on my arm, fingers brushing my cheek, small points of contact that felt like anchors. "This doesn't have to be anything," she said while folding my thesis shirt to take with her, but her fingers were laced through mine as she spoke, betraying the casualness she was trying to project. The contrast between her words and actions made my heart ache. "Maybe it already is," I replied softly, and instead of responding, she kissed me a long, slow kiss that felt like both a question and an answer. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with something that looked like hope mixed with fear. At the door, she paused with her bag in hand. "I'll text when I reach the hotel," she promised, the small commitment carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. One final kiss, gentle and quick, and then she was gone. I stood in the doorway until her car disappeared around the corner, then turned back to the house that suddenly felt impossibly empty. The space seemed to echo with her absence, the kitchen still holding traces of our morning and scattered coffee mugs and abandoned plates. The throw blanket puddled on the floor where we'd left it. I spent the weekend in a strange haze. My thesis, note spread across Marcus's kitchen table, but my attention, caught instead by Camille's elegant handwriting in the margins. Her precise observations and thoughtful questions made more sense to me than my own carefully crafted arguments. I kept finding myself tracing her written words with my fingertips, remembering how those same hands had moved through my hair, across my skin. The text she'd sent from the hotel Friday evening glowed on my phone. "Family reunions are tedious as ever, but thoughts of Thursday night make it bearable." The wine was excellent company. I'd read it dozens of times, unsure how to match her careful balance of warmth and discretion. After hours of drafting and deleting responses, I finally sent her a simple photo, her coffee mug still sitting on the sunroom windowsill where she'd left it Thursday morning, sunlight catching the rim dot when Marcus burst through the door Monday evening. His energy filled the quiet house like a sudden radio turned full volume. He dropped his bags in the hallway, launching into stories about the family trip and complaining good-naturedly about the reunion he'd managed to avoid. "Though apparently I missed some interesting dynamics," he said, sprawled across the couch while I pretended to focus on my laptop. "Mom said Aunt Camille seemed different at the gathering, like, actually smiled during Grand's endless toasts. Usually she just sits there all proper and French, you know?" I kept my expression carefully neutral, though my heart picked up speed. "Oh yeah, I don't know much about your aunt. She works in Paris, right?" "Yeah, runs some fancy architecture firm." Marcus shrugged, scrolling through his phone. "She's always been the mysterious one in the family. Brilliant but kind of distant, especially since her divorce. Dad says she used to be more fun before she married that British diplomat guy. Does she visit often?" I tried to make the question sound casual, just normal interest in a friend's relative. "Couple times a year maybe? Usually just for the big family stuff." He glanced up. "Why the sudden interest in Aunt Camille?" "Just curious," I said, grateful that Marcus had already looked back at his phone. "You know, thesis research. Always thinking about how people interact with different spaces, different cultures." That night, lying in the guest bed that still held traces of her perfume on the pillowcase, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the distance between here and Paris, about the improbability of whatever had started between us. The rational part of my brain listed all the reasons this couldn't work: the age gap, the family complications, the ocean between us, our separate established lives. But I found myself opening my laptop anyway, the blue light illuminating my face as I searched for architecture firms in Paris. One search led to another: urban planning programs at the Sorbonne, French language immersion courses, the requirements for international students. I clicked through apartments in the Marais district, imagining morning coffee on tiny balconies, evening walks along the Seine. Each search felt simultaneously like hope and foolishness. The practical side of me knew I was getting ahead of myself, building castles in the air based on one remarkable night. But another part of me, the part that remembered how perfectly her hand had fit in mine, couldn't stop imagining possibilities. I fell asleep with my laptop still open to a Apartment listing. Dreams mixing French phrases with the memory of Camille's smile across Marcus's kitchen table. The last thought I had before drifting off was that maybe some foolish hopes were worth nurturing, even if just for a little while. I threw myself into thesis revisions with renewed purpose. Camille's elegant restructuring suggestions, transforming my scattered arguments into something cohesive. Her notes gave me a framework I hadn't been able to see myself. How community spaces weren't just about physical design, but about creating possibilities for connection. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was writing about belonging while wondering if I'd ever see her again. 3 weeks crawled by. I checked my phone too often, rereading our brief text exchange until I had memorized every word. The photo I'd sent of her coffee mug, her response about the wine and Thursday night, then silence. Maybe that was her way of being kind, letting our night remain a perfect memory, untarnished by awkward attempts to define it or stretch it into something it couldn't be. I was deep in citation formatting. Thursday afternoon when Marcus called up from the front, "Dork, hey, package for you." The brown paper wrapping had French postage stamps in the corner, and my name written in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere. My hands shook slightly as I carried it to my room, not wanting to open it where Marcus might see my reaction. Inside, wrapped carefully in cream tissue paper, was a book, a first edition, on Parisian city planning from the 1960s. The cover was slightly worn, the pages yellowed with age, but the architectural photographs and diagrams inside were crystal clear. A note slipped from between the pages, written on heavy cream stationery. "For someone who sees spaces and people, CLEARLYC." I lifted the book to my face, inhaling. Her perfume clung faintly to the pages, though I couldn't tell if she'd deliberately scented it, or if it had simply absorbed the fragrance from being in her space. Either possibility made my chest tight. For hours, I lost myself in the book's pages, using my phone to slowly translate her margin notes from French. Her observations were brilliant, connecting historical design choices to modern community needs. Some comments were more personal, memories of walking these streets, favorite cafes tucked into corners, places she'd like to show someone someday. I felt like I was reading a love letter to her city, written in architectural terms. The sky outside had grown dark when I finally looked up, realizing I'd spent the entire evening with her book. My nearly finished thesis sat open on my laptop, only the dedication page still blank. I'd been stuck on it for weeks, unable to find words that felt right. Now, looking at Camille's gift, I knew exactly what to write. For those who teach us to see clearly. I submitted the final document to my advisor just before midnight, then immediately opened a new email. I'd been putting off discussing post-graduation plans, letting uncertainty keep me passive. Now I wrote about my growing interest in international urban planning, specifically European approaches to community design. I mentioned several firms in Paris doing innovative work with adaptive reuse projects, wondering if he had any contacts in that sphere. Before going to bed, I arranged her book carefully next to my closed laptop, the thesis finally complete after so many months of work. I took a photo of them side by side, the old architecture text looking perfectly at home next to my modern research. I sent it to her without caption, letting the image speak for itself. I was almost asleep when my phone lit up. The timestamp would have made it early morning in Paris. She'd sent a photo taken from what must have been her apartment window, the sky just beginning to turn pink behind the city's rooftops. The Eiffel Tower, a dark silhouette in the distance. No words, just like my message. But the image felt like more than a simple sunrise. It felt like an open door. I fell asleep with my phone still in my hand, dreaming of dawn breaking over Paris rooftops and possibilities I hadn't dared to imagine. 3 weeks ago I booked the flight at 3 in the morning, hands shaking as I entered my credit card information. 2 weeks after graduation, long enough to pack up my life, short enough that I couldn't talk myself out of it. The last of my student loan money disappeared into a one-way ticket to Paris, and I closed my laptop before I could think too hard about the financial irresponsibility of it all. I didn't tell Camille. Maybe I wanted to surprise her, or maybe I was leaving myself an escape route. If I changed my mind, no one would know except my credit card statement. Graduation day arrived, with perfect May weather, the kind of sunshine that makes everything feel possible. Marcus and his parents sat with my family in the audience, all of them beaming with uncomplicated pride. His aunt had sent congratulations through him, a formal card with her elegant handwriting that I'd read a dozen times. Searching for hidden meanings between the conventional phrases, walking across that stage felt surreal. I thought about transformation, about the distance between the uncertain student who'd started this program and whoever I was becoming. My thesis on urban spaces and human connections sat bound in university archives now. Its dedication page, a secret message she might never see. My parents took photos afterward. My mother straightening my cap, my father shaking my hand with gruff affection. They had no idea their son was plotting to fly across an ocean, chasing something that started in their friend's borrowed house. That evening, Marcus threw a party at his place. Nothing wild, just close friends and takeout and good beer. I wandered through rooms that held so many memories now. the kitchen where she'd guided my hands through proper knife technique, her perfume making it hard to concentrate on julienne vegetables, the sunroom where she'd read my thesis, making notes that changed everything, the back porch where we'd shared French wine and crossed lines we couldn't uncross. "Hey," Marcus said, handing me another beer, "did I tell you about my aunt's new project? She's designing this huge cultural center in Paris, combining gallery spaces with community workshops. Sounds exactly like the kind of thing you wrote about in your thesis." I took a long drink to hide whatever my face might have shown. "That's interesting timing." "Yeah, she's always been into that stuff. Most brilliant one in the family, according to my mom. Been different since her divorce though, more focused on projects that matter to her instead of just making money." I excused myself, claiming I needed the bathroom. Instead, I found myself standing in the doorway of her room, remembering moonlight and careful hands and conversations that felt like discovering new countries. The space looked ordinary now, guest room tidy, generic artwork on walls, but I could still see her there, backlit by morning sun, wearing my thesis defense shirt and looking at me like I was already enough. 2 days later, I stood in the airport security line with a single suitcase and her architecture book. My thesis advisor's recommendation letters for European urban planning programs were tucked between its pages, along with printouts of apartment listings and language schools. The morning light through terminal windows felt different from other departures I'd made. This wasn't running away but running toward. The flight attendant checked my boarding pass, smiling professionally. "Business or pleasure?" she asked. The routine question airports require. I thought about Camille's sunrise photo, the Eiffel Tower a promise on the horizon. "Both," I said. "Maybe both." I found her building through careful Instagram, LinkedIn details, the kind of light stalking that would have seemed creepy if I wasn't already carrying her house key from 3 weeks ago. The marais stretched around me in evening gold, centuries-old buildings wearing their history like jewelry. Her address was exactly where I'd guessed. The kind of perfectly Parisian apartment building that belonged in movies. The brass doorbell plate listed C. Dubois in elegant script that made my heart skip. I pressed it before I could lose my nerve, hearing the echo inside. Then her voice through the intercom, first confused by the unexpected visitor, then shocked as I said hello, finally warming into something that made me grip the architecture book tighter. The door buzzed open without questions. 3 flights up, she waited in her doorway, hair loose around her shoulders, wearing jeans and an oversized cream sweater that made her look younger than I remembered. The hallway light caught golden in her eyes as she stared. "You're here," she said, the words hanging between statement and question. I held up her book like it explained everything. "Seemed valuable to trust to international mail," I said, trying for casual, despite my racing pulse. I thought personal delivery was safer. Her laugh was everything I'd been missing. She pulled me inside by my jacket lapel and kissed me. In her sunlit hallway, Paris spreading beyond her windows in watercolor shades of evening. I dropped my bag, still holding the book carefully, even as I pulled her closer with my free hand. She felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. We spent that afternoon in her apartment, talking about everything and nothing. Graduation, her latest project, the weeks that had stretched between us. She showed me the cultural center plans spread across her drafting table, all clean lines and innovative community spaces. Her eyes lit up as she explained each element, asking my opinion on engagement strategies, taking notes when I suggested programming ideas. As sunset painted her walls rose gold, she took me to a tiny bistro tucked away on a side street. The owner greeted her by name, leading us to what was clearly her usual table, over wine that made me understand why she'd been unimpressed with American varieties. Our conversation flowed between French and English, neither of us minding the occasional stumbles. "I was planning to come back," she admitted, tracing the rim of her wine glass. "I told Marcus it was for family things, but double quotes." She glanced up through her lashes. "It was for you." Later, back in her apartment with Paris glittering below like scattered stars, she turned to me. "How long are you staying? How long are you staying?" "I haven't booked a return flight," I said, watching her expression carefully. I thought, maybe I'd see what opportunities are here first. She smiled against my neck, murmuring something in French that I couldn't translate but understood perfectly. We made love slowly, relearning each other's bodies, discovering how 3 weeks apart had only deepened whatever this was between us. Every touch felt both familiar and brand new. Every kiss both homecoming and exploration. Afterwards, wrapped in her sheets with the window cracked to let in night air and distant accordion music, she propped herself up on one elbow to look at me. "This," she said with deliberate emphasis, "is probably wise." I laughed, remembering that first night in Marcus's kitchen, how far we'd come from probably not wise to hear. "Probably," I agreed, pulling her closer. Tomorrow we'd visit the Sorbonne's urban planning department together. But tonight, Paris belonged to us. Just music and moonlight, and the certainty that some risks were worth taking. If tonight's words met you where you are, tap subscribe and pass it on to someone who might need the same pause. I'll meet you here tomorrow.